Welcome to Tech Talks. Our security edition today is focused on a new Splunk SOAR playbook conducting an Azure new user census. Tech Talks is a series of short webinars that are deep dives for technical practitioners. We value you, our customer, and want you to continue in your Splunk journey. Our experts help create these best practices, and we want you to leverage them in your daily role. I'm Olivia Courtney, a security product marketing specialist, and I'm excited to share with you information about Splunk Phantom and the Azure new user census. Today we're going to talk about the Hafnium attack that infiltrated Exchange servers, the Splunk detections and Phantom responses that can find an attack like this early in the chain. You'll see a demo of our newest community playbook that initiates a scheduled review of new accounts created in Azure Active Directory each week. Then we will cover additional resources available to help you take advantage of Splunk Phantom capabilities. If you have any questions, please continue the conversation through the Tech Talk discussions in the Splunk community at splunk.com/techtalk. So what happened? On Tuesday, March 2nd, Microsoft released a set of security patches for its mail server, Microsoft Exchange. These patches respond to a group of vulnerabilities known to impact Exchange throughout the years. While the CVEs do not shed much light on the specifics of the vulnerabilities or exploits, the first vulnerability has a remote network attack vector that allows the attacker, a group Microsoft named Hafnium, to authenticate as the Exchange server. 3 additional vulnerabilities were also identified as part of this activity. When chained together, along with for initial access, the attacker would have complete control over the Exchange server. This includes the ability to run code as system and write to any path on the server. A temporary mitigation for these vulnerabilities from external threats is restricting access to Outlook web services, such as placing its server behind a VPN. This does not, however, prevent an internal attacker from exploiting the vulnerability. Splunk is great at ingesting logs from all sources and looking for patterns in them. All we need to do is ensure that logs are being ingested from our Outlook Web Services servers appropriately. There are several good Splunk detections and Phantom responses that can find an attack like this earlier in the chain, but monitoring new user accounts from Phantom is one of the easiest to get started with and the least specific to any particular kind of attack. We already knew Active Directory was one of the most important systems for our security posture, and Hafnium just gave us a not-so-subtle reminder that we need to stay on top of it, whether that's on-prem through regular Active Directory or in the cloud with Azure Active Directory. Our newest Community Phantom playbook initiates a scheduled review of new accounts created in Azure Active Directory each week. The generated report shows some basic information about each of the new users and provides their user IDs for further investigation. I'll pass this over to my colleague, Phil Royer, to show you how.
Hi, this is Phil Royer, Research Engineer at Splunk. Today I want to show a new Phantom Community Playbook called Azure New User Census. This playbook uses Azure Active Directory and the Microsoft Graph API to list out new user accounts created in the last week. This is an important hygiene check to make sure that accounts aren't being created from unknown sources, or that threat actors aren't putting accounts in your systems to make sure they can regain access. Recently there was a threat actor called Hafnium that used a 0-day on the Exchange email server to get access to a number of organizations. And one of the things they did was create new user accounts that allowed them to come back in even if their web shells or their other persistence techniques weren't working. So a playbook like this is fairly simple, but it should allow an analyst to see when there are some strange looking accounts that pop into your Azure Active Directory and to try to track down where those came from and make sure they're benign. So to set up this playbook, first you need to do the apps and assets as usual. And so I'll jump over and just show briefly the Azure AD Graph app and the MS Graph for Office 365. So these are a little more complicated to set up than some of the other apps because they do use OAuth. So you're going to get a redirect URL out of Phantom, put that into your Azure portal, and then use the test connectivity button in Phantom to actually connect the app and get its OAuth certified. So once you get these 2 apps on here, the next one's much more simple. It's just a timer. I put it here every week on Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. just to create a new event and allow us to kick off the playbook. So once you sync from the community playbook repo and you set the playbook to active, you're ready to run it. You can use the Pull Now button on the timer to push in an event like this. We can see the playbook executed as soon as the container was created, and there were 3 actions run. So if we remind ourselves about the playbook, the first thing it did was list users in Azure Active Directory and create a date-time string of 1 week ago. If you did want to adjust that to 2 weeks ago, you could do it just like that. Any number of days or months could be in there. We created that datetime string and then compared against the Azure Active Directory created datetime to come up with a list of filters to pass to the Microsoft Graph API. So we're going to grab those same users in Microsoft Graph to see their Office 365 accounts as well as what's in Azure. So once we've formatted the query, we're going to send it into Microsoft Graph, and that's going to list out users with those matching principal names. We're going to filter it down to match the records that came out of Graph with those that came out of Azure AD, just to make sure that we're only looking at 1 record per account. And then the end of the playbook is just formatting a note for the analyst and saving artifacts, 1 each for those principal users. And of course, once we build the note, we're going to add it back to the container, and the playbook will be done. So we can see once it's run, it's got a full list of users. There's 17 users in Azure Active Directory. And then in Graph, it's only going back for 5 of those users, because those are the ones that pass the filter with the created date time. So we have IDs, principal names, display names, and we'll see in the note, actually, that we're going to get the office location and the role of these new users. So we have a marketing manager here, sits in building 12, created on March 2nd. And we're just creating 1 table there per user record using Markdown. So if we come over to the artifacts, here's the user principal name and the list of actions we can run on it. So we can disable tokens, reset the password, disable the user account, or remove it entirely. And we could take it further in MS Graph and do email queries, like listing out emails that have certain subject lines to find a phishing campaign. Or we can look at, and to make sure that the right set of emails is there for a new user, to make sure that they were onboarded correctly. So there's a number of places you could take that, but we're going to leave it open-ended from this playbook. Just create the artifacts and present the note to the analyst. So that's it for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. We're about ready to wrap up this tech talk, but before we do, I wanted to share quick resources available to you to continue your journey. Check out our documentation for an in-depth guide on monitoring Windows account access, as well as an overview of Azure Identity Management. Phil's blog, Splunk SOAR Playbooks, Conducting an Azure New User Census, goes even further in depth on how to use this playbook. And don't forget that we have an incredible community of Splunk users on our community site. You can search the Answers section on security. You can continue the conversation for this talk within the discussion section called Tech Talks. You'll find all the additional resources there. And finally, there's Splunk Ideas, where you can submit new product enhancements or vote for current ideas from other customers. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. Please tune back in for future Tech Talks. We are excited to share this series with you.